Yo, what's going on guys? Camille here. So she's finally back. Ayaka's rerun is finally here. She's one of the top DPSs in the game. So if you need a strong DPS, now is your chance to go for Ayaka. In this video, I'm going to be showing you guys how to build her and optimize her to do the most damage. So without further ado, please don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and let's begin. Alright, so before I start, I just want to talk about Ayaka's roles. Ayaka in general is meant to be a main DPS, and you can also use her as a sub DPS. I do recommend you guys to use her as a main DPS because she's definitely one of the strongest in the game, but she's also pretty usable and strong as a burst DPS. In terms of builds, they're going to be pretty similar, the main DPS and sub DPS build. Even in like teams and stuff like that, they're going to be pretty similar. The only difference is that do you want to use Ayaka to also like auto attack, or do you want to only use her for her elemental burst? That's like the main difference between them. Otherwise, it's pretty much the same thing. That's because Ayaka's biggest source of damage is her elemental burst anyways, so you're going to be optimizing the teams and playstyle and the build for Ayaka's elemental burst anyways in both builds, so it wouldn't really matter as much. Talking about her elemental burst, moving on to talent priorities. So for Ayaka's talent priorities, for all of the builds, you'd want to upgrade your elemental burst first. Your elemental burst is going to be pretty important. It's definitely your main source of damage, so you'd want to prioritize it. Now for a DPS build, if you want to use your auto attacks, then you should definitely upgrade them next. If you don't want to use your auto attacks, then you'd want to upgrade your elemental skill next. So yeah, for a DPS build, burst, autos, and then skill. For a sub DPS build, then just burst and skill. That's it. Now I'm going to give you guys some quick tips on how to optimize your Ayaka's gameplay. So the first tip is that you'd want to use your charge attacks. Her charge attacks multipliers are very good, so you definitely want to use them. Now you don't want to use your charge attacks alone because the animations are going to be like costing you a lot of DPS. So you'd want to use a charge attack, then one or two normal attacks to cancel the animation, and then use a charge attack again. Also, because of her passive talent, every time you dash and hit opponents with cryo, you're going to gain cryo damage bonus. So obviously you'd want to be dashing every now and then to keep the cryo applications first and to also gain cryo damage bonus. So that being said, the general rotation for DPS Ayaka's normal attacks is going to be like this. You just want to dash, charge attacks, and one or two normal attacks, then charge attack again. You can probably repeat this like 2-3 times, and then you'd want to dash again and repeat. And when I say dash, I mean like dash and hit an enemy with cryo, or apply cryo on an enemy, like dash close to an enemy to get the benefits from the dash. And also you'd want to dash before your elemental burst too, obviously because you'd want to get cryo damage bonus too, so before your elemental burst you'd want to dash too. Her other passive is that it's going to increase your normal and charge attacks damage by 30% for 6 seconds after you use your elemental skill. That's also pretty good, so after using your elemental skill you probably want to be auto attacking in that period. So now for a general rotation for Ayaka, when you have your elemental burst ready, say you have your elemental burst and skill ready right now, everything is ready. In that case you'd want to go like this. You'd want to dash, use your elemental skill, and then burst. You'd want to do that to collect particles from your elemental skill for your next elemental burst, and then you want to keep dashing and charging normal attacking like I said before. So yeah, that's the general rotation for Ayaka. Obviously on the downtime of your elemental burst and skill, you'd want to switch to other characters to use their bursts and stuff like that. Alright, so now moving on to our constellations. We're going to quickly go through them, and I'm going to tell you guys which ones are worth it and which ones are not. So the first constellation is just basically going to decrease the cooldown of your elemental skill. I wouldn't say it's worth it, honestly. I mean, yeah, it's going to give you a little bit more damage and energy in the long run, but generally speaking, for a C1, I wouldn't say it's worth it. It doesn't really change much. For C2 is going to release 2 small bursts. Each one of them is going to deal 20% of your elemental burst damage. So in other words, it's going to technically increase your elemental burst damage by 40%. Now that's pretty huge and true, but the problem is these 2 bursts are not going to always hit enemies. So the damage increase is not going to be like always 40%. It's probably going to be lower than that. But even with that, C2 is still going to be a big damage jump. I'd say C2 is worth it, honestly. It's pretty cool constellation. It's also kind of cheap. It's not going to increase your damage by like 40% always, but it's definitely going to be giving you extra damage. So yeah, I would say C2 is cool. C3 is going to increase the level of your elemental burst. I'd honestly say it's worth it too. As I said before, your elemental burst is very necessary. It's your main source of damage. So a 3 levels talent upgrade is going to bring your damage up by a lot. So yeah, I'd say C3 is pretty good. Now C4 is that when you use your elemental burst, the enemy's defense is going to be decreased by 30%. That's pretty huge, honestly. And by the way, it's not going to ignore the enemy's defense by 30%. No, it's going to actually lower their defense by 30%. So if you want to use your elemental burst and keep auto attacking, or you want to use some other characters' bursts or attacks and stuff like that, they're also going to benefit it from the 30% defense decrease. So it's not like her elemental burst only that's gonna ignore the defense. Honestly, I'd say C4 is pretty good as a DPS constellation and as a support constellation kind of too. So yeah, I'd say C4 is worth it. C5 is gonna increase the level of your elemental skill, definitely not worth it. Then C6 is that it's gonna give you a strong charge attack each 10 seconds. It's gonna increase your charge attacks multipliers to 298 each 10 seconds. By the way, 298 is a huge multiplier. Also mix that from the normal and charge attacks damage increase from the passive, and that's gonna be pretty huge. So yeah, it's definitely gonna be a huge damage increase in general, but would I say it's worth it? Honestly, for a C6, I feel like it's kind of meh. It's not really like that big of a deal. Yes, it's gonna increase your damage, obviously, but I wouldn't say it's worth it. So for constellations in general, I would say her good constellations are gonna be 2, 3, and 4. If you're planning to go for constellations, then one of them is gonna be pretty good. You can stop at C2 or at C3 or at C4. Each one of them is gonna be giving you decent amounts of damage, and you can stop at wherever you like. And by the way, even C0 is gonna be very, very good on Ayaka. She's very free to play friendly. She doesn't like need any of her constellations. They're gonna be pretty cool damage increases, but nothing really like necessary or too special or anything like that. So yeah, in my opinion, if you want to stay C0, that's definitely fine. Alright, so now moving on to her weapons. So her best in slot is going to be the Mid-Splitter Reforged. That's definitely going to be her best in slot. She's going to be able to use all of the stacks, and that's going to result in a lot of damage. Now, the second tier weapons you can say are going to be the Summit Shaper, the Jade Cutter, and also the Haran Geppaku. All of these are going to be pretty good weapons on Ayaka. The Summit Shaper is probably going to be the next best, then the Jade Cutter and the Geppaku. The Jade Cutter and the Geppaku are going to have a crit rate substat, which is not really preferable on Ayaka, but they're definitely still very good weapon. Your next tier weapons you can say are also 5 stars. They're the Aquila Favonia and the Skyward Blade. These weapons are not really going to be that good on Ayaka, mainly because of their substats for 5-star weapons, but they're still going to be pretty good and they're going to outperform almost any other 4-star weapon. So if you have them and you don't have any of the other weapons, you can use them on Ayaka too. Now moving on for the 4-star options, your best in slot for 4-star is going to be the Blackcliff. It's going to give you a crit damage substat, which is pretty good. It's also a free to play weapon, kind of, you can say, so you definitely want to use it on Ayaka if you have it. Now your next tier weapons, you're gonna have the Black Sword. It's gonna be usable on Ayaka too. The substat is definitely not that good on Ayaka. It's crit rate, which she doesn't really need, but it's still gonna be usable. Your best free to play weapon is gonna be the Aminuma Kaguchi. It's a craftable weapon and it's gonna be pretty good on Ayaka. You can also use the Flute. It's gonna be usable on Ayaka too, and if you don't have any of those, you can use the 3-star Harbinger of Dawn, and it's gonna be very usable on Ayaka too. For a 3-star weapon, it's definitely going to be doing a good job. So if you don't have any of the other weapons, you can use it. Alright, so now moving on to her artifact. So her best artifact set is going to be the 4-piece Blizzard. Obviously, that's if you're playing her in a freeze team, which you should be. It's going to be giving you a lot of extra crit rate, which is pretty good. If you don't want to use a 4-piece Blizzard, either because you don't have like a full 4-piece or because you don't want to use her in a freeze team, which by the way, you should use a 4-piece Blizzard. In my opinion, I think it's necessary for Ayaka. But if you don't want to use it, you can go a 2-piece Blizzard and a 2-piece attack set, the Shimenoas, Gladiators, and the other sets. Or if you're using her as a sub DPS, you can use a 2-piece Blizzard and a 2-piece Noblesse. But again, I stress it, I really recommend getting a 4-piece Blizzard for Ayaka. Alright, so now moving on to her artifact stats. I just want to say guys, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please make sure to subscribe. Thank you. But for her artifact stats, starting off with the main stats, it's pretty simple. You just want attack percent on your Sands, cryo damage bonus on your Goblet, and then crit damage on your Circlet. For the Circlet, as I said before, you're gonna have the crit rate from the 4-piece Blizzard. If you're not using the 4-piece Blizzard, then you might want to go crit rate on your Circlet, but generally speaking, crit damage is the way to go. For the substats, it's also pretty simple. You just want crit damage, attack percent, then energy recharge. That's it. Now for the final stats you'd want to have on your Ayaka, you'd want your crit damage to be around 140 to 180. To be honest, maybe even more, like get as much crit damage as you can. Again, I repeat, if you're not using the 4-piece Blizzard, then you'd want your crit rate to sit around 50 to 70%. But if you're using a usual build for Ayaka, then you don't need crit rate. You're gonna get crit rate from the Cryo Resonance and also from the 4-piece Blizzard. Now for energy recharge, you'd want it to sit around 130 to 160%. I'd say that's probably the sweet spot for Ayaka. You definitely want to use her with another battery on your team. If you're not using her with a battery, then it's mad. They're gonna need like 200% energy recharge. But with a battery, 130 to 160 is gonna be enough. Maybe for a sub DPS, you'd want to go more towards 160. And for a main DPS, I feel like 130, 140 is gonna be enough. Basically, just get a couple of substats and you're gonna be good. Alright, so now moving on to our team comps. So for Ayaka's team comps, guys, it's pretty simple and kind of limited. You'd want to play her in a freeze team. You can play her in a melt team too, but we're not going to talk about that because it's definitely going to be way worse than a freeze team. So yeah, we're only going to talk about her in a freeze team. You know what? I'm going to tell you guys why a melt team is going to be worse than a freeze team. So first of all, it's because in a reverse melt team, you're going to need to build crit rate on Ayaka. And obviously building crit rate is going to take your focus away from crit damage, which is going to result in less overall damage generally. Second reason is that melt teams at this point are very inconsistent for Ayaka. She applies cryo too fast, so she's generally not going to be the one melting. She's going to be applying cryo and then the other pyro enabler on your team is going to be melting his hits. But Ayaka's hits are not going to be melting. So Ayaka in this case is going to be kind of like a cryo enabler. And because she's one of the best DPSs in the game, you don't want to waste her potential. Last reason is, and it's not really that important, but when you use Ayaka's burst, it's going to kind of like run away from enemies. Sometimes it's going to be like moving away. But in a freeze team, it's not going to be doing that. You're going to freeze enemies and the burst is going to be stuck with them and keep hitting them. And obviously, again, that's going to result in more DPS. So yeah, melt team is not the way to go with Ayaka. A freeze team is the way to go. Now, what you need in a freeze team is this. Obviously, you're going to need Ayaka, and then you're going to need another cryo with Ayaka, preferably a support cryo, and then you're going to need the hydro enabler, and finally, you're going to need the swirler with the Verdescent. That's it. So a team for Ayaka is going to be looking like this. You'd want Ayaka as a main DPS, obviously, then another cryo, let's say Diona, Rosaria, maybe even Ganyu, or anyone like this. Shenhe is going to work too. You'd want a hydro enabler. The best one is probably Shengshou, but you can use Kokomi or Mona too. And then you want a swirler with the Verdescent, for example, Kazuha, Sucrose, or maybe even Venti. Venti is going to be working pretty well with Ayaka. It's going to be grouping enemies, so if you have him, you can use him with Ayaka, but the thing you're going to need is a swirler. You want to use the Verdescent and swirl cryo, so you're going to increase your damage. So yeah, that's the team generally for Ayaka. Depending on the other characters on your team, her role might change. For example, if you're using her with Ganyu, then in that case, Ganyu is probably the main DPS, and Ayaka is going to be like the sub DPS, you can say. She's going to be doing damage only with her elemental burst. But yeah, any team for Ayaka is going to be looking like this. So yeah, that's the video, guys. If you enjoyed it, please don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel. If you want to say anything, leave it in the comments, and see y'all in the next video. Peace.